The HOA president called the cops on me for trespassing in my own backyard. Big mistake. She had no idea I'm the municipal judge who could shut down her entire corrupt operation with one signature. There I was, 9:17 on a Saturday morning, sweat dripping down my back as I wrestled with a fence post in the Texas heat. The metallic clang of my post-hole digger echoed through the neighborhood when suddenly, whoop whoop. Police sirens shattered the morning calm. 3 squad cars screamed into my driveway, gravel crunching under their tires like broken glass. I straightened up, dirt caked under my fingernails, and watched 3 officers step out with that familiar hand-on-belt stance. Behind them, HOA President Cordelia Blackthorne stood smugly by her white Lexus, arms crossed, practically vibrating with satisfaction. What she didn't know was that for 6 months, I'd been quietly building a federal fraud case against her, and her little power trip just became Exhibit A. What would you do if someone weaponized the police against you in your own yard, and where are you watching from? Drop your state below. I'll tell you if your HOA laws are as broken as ours were. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in this mess. My name's Harrison Webb, and I've been a municipal judge for 20 years. I bought this property 2 years ago, a quiet cul-de-sac outside Austin. It was meant to be my retirement home, a slice of peace after decades of courtroom chaos. What I didn't realize was that peace doesn't exist where people like Cordelia run the show. It started small, notes left on my mailbox about lawn height violations. Then came noise complaints for trimming hedges. Once, she even fined me $250 because my dog's leash color didn't match community guidelines. It was laughable, until I realized what she was doing to my neighbors. Cordelia's HOA wasn't about community. It was about control. She and her board were skimming money from maintenance fees, double billing residents, and forging signatures on contracts for repairs that never happened. I'd seen their kind before, petty tyrants who mistake paperwork for power. So I did what I do best, I watched, listened, and gathered evidence. Every shady payment, every fake invoice, every intimidation letter, I collected them all. I wasn't just building a complaint. I was building a case. That Saturday morning, I was replacing a section of my fence that her HOA inspector had mysteriously damaged last week. I'd seen the security footage, one of her handymen, late at night, hammering at my property line. So I decided to fix it myself, legally, on my land. That's when she struck. "Sir, we got a call about a trespasser," one officer said, stepping forward. I looked him dead in the eye. "Officer, I own this land. Every inch of it." Cordelia smirked. "He's lying. The fence crosses HOA boundaries." He was warned. I wiped the sweat off my forehead and smiled. "You want to check the deed? I have it right inside. And so does the county clerk, under my signature." The officers exchanged looks. They weren't stupid, they knew who I was. I saw recognition flicker in one of their eyes, followed by a nervous swallow. Cordelia, realizing something was off, stepped back. I don't care who he is. He's breaking HOA policy." One officer finally said it. "Ma'am, that's Judge Webb. Municipal Court." Her face drained of color. The morning birds went silent. Even the air seemed to freeze. I leaned on my shovel, calm as a verdict. "Well, Cordelia," I said evenly, "looks like you just trespassed into the wrong man's jurisdiction." She didn't know it yet, but by the end of that week, her entire HOA empire was about to crumble, one document at a time. Cordelia's face went pale as the realization sank in. The smug authority that had always dripped from her voice evaporated like steam in the Texas heat. The officers didn't even bother taking out their notepads anymore, they just looked at each other, then at me. "Judge Webb," said Officer Ramirez quietly, "we're sorry for the confusion, sir. We were told this was a case of trespassing." I nodded, voice steady. "I understand, officer. You were just doing your job." But I think you've been misled by someone with personal motives. Cordelia's lips twitched. This isn't over, she hissed, but the power in her tone was gone. She turned on her heel and marched back to her Lexus, nearly tripping over the curb. Gravel spat from her tires as she sped away, her pride leaving skid marks behind. I watched her go, the corners of my mouth curling into the faintest smile. She thought she'd humiliated me. She had no idea she'd just given me probable cause to open the door she'd kept locked for years. That evening, I sat at my mahogany desk, the same one I'd used to sign hundreds of warrants, divorce decrees, and municipal orders. My study was dimly lit, papers spread out like a chessboard of corruption. Each document told a story, altered invoices, duplicate bank statements, ghost maintenance projects billed to residents. Cordelia's signature was all over them, a bold cursive flourish of arrogance. Maintenance contract, $12,000 for pool filter replacement. Except, the community pool hadn't had a filter for years. Tree trimming project, approved by board majority. Except, 2 of the supposed board members had moved away months earlier. Every page was a nail. And I was ready to build her coffin out of them. The next morning, I made a call. Clara, it's Harrison, I said when my assistant answered. I need you to pull all HOA financial records for Whispering Oaks from the county registry, tax filings, maintenance contracts, board election minutes, everything. Her tone sharpened. Are we talking personal review or judicial inquiry? I smiled faintly. Let's call it a preliminary observation. By noon, a brown envelope slid across my desk. Inside was everything I needed, and more. Cordelia's HOA wasn't just skimming a little cash. They were laundering thousands through fake vendors, pocketing late fees, and even fabricating property assessments to pressure homeowners into compliance fines. But what made my stomach drop wasn't the theft. It was the pattern. Every single target of Cordelia's harassment, the people she fined, bullied, or threatened, belonged to the same demographic, retirees, immigrants, and working-class black families who couldn't afford to fight back. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about power and prejudice. That night, I couldn't sleep. The ceiling fan hummed above me as my mind raced through courtroom procedures and ethical codes. Judges aren't supposed to interfere personally, but what happens when the system itself is being manipulated to hurt the very people it's supposed to protect? I decided to tread carefully. Officially, I was still a homeowner. Unofficially, I was building a noose of evidence around Cordelia Blackthorn's empire. 3 days later, she tried to flex her power again. An HOA notice arrived, folded neatly, printed in her usual serif font. Due to non-compliance with HOA guidelines, property owner Harrison Webb is hereby fined $500 for unapproved construction and may be subject to property lien. That was her fatal mistake. Because what she didn't realize was that by threatening me while under active investigation, she'd crossed from civil abuse into criminal intimidation. I slid the letter into a file labeled Whispering Oaks vs. Blackthorn et al. And wrote a single note on the margin. Initiate preliminary hearing request. Then I leaned back, looking out my window at the perfectly trimmed lawns that hid so much rot beneath. Cordelia, I muttered to the empty room, you've played judge, jury, and executioner for long enough. The real trial was about to begin. By the end of that week, Whispering Oaks didn't feel like a peaceful Texas suburb anymore. It felt like a courtroom waiting for the verdict. Whispers followed me down the sidewalk when I went for my morning jog. Neighbors who once waved from their porches now looked both ways before greeting me. Some smiled, grateful. Others looked terrified. And in the middle of it all, Cordelia strutted around like nothing had happened, still holding her HOA clipboard like a royal scepter. The difference was, she knew. Word had spread fast that I wasn't just some homeowner. I was Judge Harrison Webb, and her empire was under my microscope. That Sunday, the HOA held a mandatory community meeting at the clubhouse. It was Cordelia's way of reasserting control, her last desperate attempt to remind everyone who she thought was boss. I went, of course. You can't fight corruption from the outside. Sometimes you have to sit quietly in its front row. When I walked in, the air was thick with tension. Cordelia stood at the podium, blonde hair pinned back so tight it looked painful, pearls gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice brittle. "I understand there's been some confusion lately regarding HOA regulations and law enforcement involvement." A murmur rippled through the crowd. She continued, forcing a smile. "Let's be clear, the HOA's role is to maintain standards, not to persecute homeowners. Any rumors about misconduct or fraud are simply misunderstandings." That's when Mr. Alvarez, a quiet retiree who lived 3 houses down, raised his trembling hand. "Then how do you explain the double charge for my roof replacement, Cordelia?" he asked. "You said the board approved it. But I called 2 of them, they said they never saw the invoice." The room went dead silent. Cordelia froze, then laughed nervously. "Well, sometimes records get forged," another voice interrupted. This time it was Tanya Williams, a nurse who'd been fined for parking her work van outside overnight. "Because I've got your signature on a violation notice dated 3 days before the rule even passed." Gasps. Murmurs. Phones started recording. I stayed quiet, sitting in the back row, watching the walls of her confidence crack like old plaster. Cordelia slammed her folder shut. "Enough. This meeting is adjourned," she barked, storming off the stage. But the damage was done. The neighbors had seen through the curtain. After the meeting, Tanya caught up with me in the parking lot. "Judge Webb," she whispered, looking over her shoulder. "We've all been scared to speak. She fines us for anything, trash cans, paint colors, even garden plants. If you're really going after her, we'll help." I nodded slowly. "Then let's make this right, together." That night, my kitchen turned into a command center. Stacks of folders and USB drives filled the counter. Residents dropped off photos, documents, and letters. One man even brought an old HOA ledger book he'd found in his attic. By midnight, I had enough evidence to fill a courtroom. The pattern was undeniable: falsified votes, misappropriated funds, and violations targeted toward minorities or those who questioned her. At 2:47 a.m., under the soft hum of my desk lamp, I began typing the one document Cordelia had prayed would never exist, a formal judicial complaint filed under my authority as municipal judge of Travis County. It wasn't vengeance. It was justice. Still, I knew Cordelia wouldn't go down quietly. She was the kind of woman who'd rather set the neighborhood on fire than lose control of it. The next morning, I found proof of that on my doorstep, my car's windshield smashed, and a note tucked under the wiper. "Judges bleed too." The game had changed. She wasn't just corrupt anymore. She was dangerous. The sound of shattered glass still echoed in my ears when I read the note again. Judges bleed too. It wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration of war. I took a slow breath, scanning my driveway. The early morning sun glinted off shards of glass scattered across the pavement like ice. Whoever had done this wanted me to see it, to feel unsafe, unsettled, watched. But intimidation only works on people who have something to lose. And Cordelia had already taken that from too many of my neighbors. I snapped a few photos, called the sheriff's department, and filed an incident report. The deputy, a tall man with tired eyes, looked around and sighed. "Judge Webb, we've been getting quiet complaints about this HOA for months. People are scared. But no one's ever had the guts to put it in writing." I gave him a small, knowing smile. "They do now." That afternoon, I visited Tanya Williams and Mr. Alvarez again. We gathered in Tanya's living room, blinds drawn, papers scattered across her coffee table. The room smelled of stale coffee and tension. Tanya's hands shook slightly as she handed me a thumb drive. This is the security footage from last month. Shows one of Cordelia's board members slipping envelopes into people's mailboxes at night. I think it's hush money. Mr. Alvarez leaned forward. And I found bank statements. They're moving HOA dues into a shell company, registered in Cordelia's maiden name. I stared at the files, the puzzle pieces finally forming the full picture. Fraud, intimidation, harassment, and now, physical threats. All right, I said quietly, it's time. By Thursday, I had everything ready. A 47-page judicial complaint detailing financial misconduct, falsification of community documents, and harassment under color of authority. I attached sworn statements from residents and evidence of embezzlement totaling over $180,000. As I slid the final document into a binder, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Judge Webb, came Cordelia's voice, sweet and venomous at once. You think you're clever, don't you? Turning my community against me. I leaned back in my chair, calm but alert. It's not your community, Cordelia. It's theirs. You just forgot that. Her voice dropped, sharp as a knife. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? I smiled faintly. Oh, I do. And tomorrow morning, so will the Attorney General's office. There was silence. Then, click. That night, a storm rolled in. Thunder cracked across the sky, wind howling through the pecan trees. I sat in my study, watching rain streak down the window, every flash of lightning revealing the same thought in my mind, she's not done. At 11:23 p.m., my motion sensor light flickered on. I stepped quietly to the window. There, just beyond the fence line, stood a figure in a raincoat, watching my house. No movement. Just, watching. I reached for my phone and hit record. Got you, I muttered, zooming in through the blinds. The face became clearer under a flash of lightning, one of Cordelia's board members, holding something metallic. The next day, I handed the footage directly to the county sheriff. Within hours, 2 warrants were signed, for trespassing, intimidation, and destruction of property. Cordelia's little kingdom was starting to crumble. By Friday morning, the news had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Patrol cars rolled slowly through Whispering Oaks, lights flashing. Neighbors stood on porches, whispering. Some filmed. Some cried. Cordelia tried to play the victim, calling an emergency HOA meeting. But when she arrived at the clubhouse, the doors were locked. A notice was taped to the front. By order of the Travis County Court, the Whispering Oaks HOA Board is hereby suspended pending investigation of financial and criminal misconduct. I signed that notice myself. Standing there in the rain, I finally felt the weight of 6 months lift off my shoulders. But even then, I knew it wasn't over. Cordelia Blackthorne wasn't the kind of woman to fade quietly into the background. And when cornered animals lose power, they bite. 2 weeks later, the courthouse smelled faintly of coffee, paper, and tension. Reporters lined the hallway, microphones poised like bayonets. The headline had already hit the local news. HOA president under investigation for fraud and harassment, Judge Webb leads inquiry. Cordelia arrived flanked by her attorney, wearing a navy suit and a pearl necklace that couldn't hide the tremor in her hands. Gone was the queen of Whispering Oaks. What stood before me was a woman stripped of control, her empire reduced to ink and fear. I sat at the bench, gavel resting beside a stack of evidence. Officially, I wasn't presiding over the case, I'd recused myself to avoid conflict of interest. But I was there, front row, watching justice finally catch up to her. The prosecutor, a sharp young woman named Danielle Carter, stood confidently before the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't about lawn rules or property lines. This is about power, abused, monetized, and weaponized against honest families. She turned toward Cordelia. The defendant used her position to extort residents, falsify financial records, and intimidate homeowners through police and property liens. But thanks to one homeowner who refused to be silenced, we have the paper trail to prove it. Cordelia's lawyer tried to object, tried to twist the narrative, but every time, Danielle countered with documents, bank statements, testimony, photographs. Each one was another nail. Then came the moment that silenced the courtroom. Danielle placed a glossy photo on the projection screen. It showed Cordelia's board member standing outside my fence the night of the storm, holding a crowbar. This was intimidation, she said coldly. And it was ordered, by her. Cordelia's composure cracked. Her hand twitched. Her lips parted. And in a whisper that echoed louder than thunder, she muttered, "You don't know what they promised me." That one sentence changed everything. Danielle pounced. "Who promised you, Ms. Blackthorne?" Cordelia's eyes darted, panic rising. "It wasn't just me. The developers, they told me to keep people in line. Said it was how we maintain property values. They funded the accounts." The room gasped. Developers. The corruption went deeper than even I imagined. By the time court adjourned, the Attorney General's office had already dispatched investigators. Cordelia was escorted out, trembling, her attorney trailing behind like a defeated shadow. That night, Whispering Oaks was silent. No more inspection notes on mailboxes. No more HOA trucks circling like vultures. The community felt alive again. Kids played basketball in driveways, neighbors gathered on porches, and someone even grilled barbecue in the open, a small act of rebellion that felt like victory. Tanya Williams stopped by with a pie and tears in her eyes. "We couldn't have done it without you, Judge Webb," she said softly. I shook my head. "No, Tanya. You all did this. I just held up a mirror." Later, as the sun dipped behind the oaks, I sat on my repaired fence, the same one that had started this entire war. The wood felt solid beneath my palms, the earth steady again. My phone buzzed, a message from the county clerk. Case closed. Whispering Oaks HOA, officially dissolved by court order. I exhaled, slow and heavy, watching the last light fade across the horizon. After 20 years of judging others, I'd finally learned something new. Sometimes justice doesn't come from the bench. Sometimes it comes from the backyard. And somewhere, in a quiet jail cell across town, Cordelia Blackthorne finally understood what that word really meant.